Lynn, it's Barbara. Can you hear us down in Henderson?
Hello?
Hi, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started then? All right, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange meeting that's been properly noticed for today at 1:30. We're teleconferencing between our offices in Henderson and here in Carson City. I don't have any particular announcements to make today. Do you, Mr. Fisher?
Madam Chair, no, I don't.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead then and have the roll call to make sure that we have a quorum.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Johnstone? Ms. Lewis?
Present.
Dr. Jameson? Ms. Kerr?
Present in Carson City.
Dr. Ford?
Present.
Mr. Wilden? Commissioner Kipper?
Here.
Ms. Teska?
Here.
Vice Chair Edkins?
Here.
And Madam Chair Campbell?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's move on to public comment. May I have a show of hands in Henderson and here in Carson City on those that would like to make public comment?
We have 2 in Henderson.
Okay. We have 0 here in Carson. So why don't you just help me manage the public comment from there?
We're ready.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Barry Gold. I'm the Director of Government Relations for AARP Nevada. When I attended the Interim Health Committee meeting last week, Mr. Fisher gave an update on HealthLink and what was happening in the switch to a state-supported based exchange, and he talked about the possibility of there being how many different websites and potentially 3 call centers, and one of them stopped him and said, now, how are you going to let people know about all those different things that they might have to navigate? And his answer was, the messaging will be important. And I absolutely agree with that. What I'm here to do is AARP strongly urges the board, the staff, the marketing company to seek the input of consumers, of advocates, and actual consumers themselves on what that messaging should be. It is very easy for all of us who've been following this, who have been inside of it, to think, we understand it and we know what people will need to hear and we know how we need to explain this to them, but I strongly urge that you get as much consumer input because the messaging will be very important because there will be a lot going on. So I'm hoping that's taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more public comment coming to the table.
Yes. Or the whole packet? No, it's one. I put it, and there's an extra one there for posting. Hi, I'm Patrick Casal, Patrick Casal Associates. I know nobody's heard of me before, but what I provided here on the first page, this is actually a sheet we utilize to figure out, a cheat sheet, how to figure out where somebody would fall with regard to subsidy, CSR potential, et cetera. I urge that everybody who enrolls somebody has a copy of this. This is the least of the issue of what I'm going to talk about. We now have a new thing going on, and I'm getting a plethora of clients being terminated, and I'd like to share this with you. The next page, you'll see a lady, the client's name is Tina. She receives a letter that says her termination was 2/28/14. The next page, you'll notice, she was instructed to make a payment March 15th, before March 15th, 2014, to have an April 1 coverage. I'd like to know how you can retroactively terminate somebody who's supposed to start April 1st, terminate their coverage on February 28th. This seems to be the consistent thing of the day. The next one, you'll notice I put a chronology there for the next client, similar situation. If you turn the page, she was instructed to make a payment on or before March 15th, 2014 for coverage to start April 1st. She did everything she's supposed to, made her payments timely, they've cleared. Yet they're terminating because this person was told, or they're being told internally by the computer system, that her coverage was supposed to start January 1st. My understanding is in order to have coverage start on the 1st of a month, it has to be received on or before the 15th of a month prior to. If we get payments on March 15th, accordingly, the coverage should start April 1st, not January 1st. I had another client who was terminated for 9 cents. We fixed that because the system doesn't know how to read the check. If the payment isn't exact, Xerox doesn't process the payment correctly. They hold on to the money. You'll notice the next page, Alexandra said perfect, because I sent a copy of the letter that substantiates the client's claim. They're going to fix that. The next one is a bill for my client, Miss Luna, that says that her balance, or premium should be $147.40 the previous month. Her new premium for July is $374.60, which is actually the right premium. What's going to happen to this young lady is she's going to pay $522 and sometime in August or maybe September receive termination for coverage for lack of payment. How can the system not recognize the proper billing? And so you have consumers making payments accordingly and being punished for doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the last one, Miss Courtney Lane, is very interesting. This is a two-sided copy. Miss Lane has paid $1,800 in premiums, and her coverages are being suspended or lapsed because they can't get it right. This is a young lady and her husband who have lots of claims. The result, if you read the solution being presented to Xerox, and they're blaming the carrier as to why they can't bring this policy retroactive to where she should be covered. They're saying she goes forward to July 1st. I mean, these are just part of the problems that I've been dealing with over the last 2 weeks. It's consistent that the billing problem is crazy, and I recommend that you do more of a manual billing, maybe have 4 teams, divide them up by 4, and have them go through the billing correctly to fix this, because people are making payments and being terminated. It's insane. How do you tell a client you've been terminated for 9 cents? That shouldn't give me a call we're receiving. And then in these particular cases, they're getting letters because the payments are coming in later. I have another lady named Terry Ann Uane who's not in here. She's made several payments. They can't cover her till July 1st. All her previous claims are going to be on her back. These are the kind of things that are happening. The billing process has got to be fixed internally. And I'm thinking maybe you can get somebody from the various carriers to help. Like if they're HPN clients or the co-op clients or St. Mary's or Blue Cross, they could come in and fix this. I had a situation with an individual with Blue Cross, made one phone call, went there, and they fixed it internally, but it wasn't a billing, it was a claims issue. I really believe the billing process should be looked at right now, immediately, like that, because a lot of people are getting clobbered. And the thing that we're hearing, the carriers will not allow us to backdate the policy. If you've received money and you're sending out letters that state your coverage starts May 1, April, or March, and they make payments, how is it the consumer's fault, and how are they moving them forward to July 1 or August 1? They should be covered when they paid the premiums correctly. And that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Atkins?
All of those documents Mr. Roost has, I am going to ask though that I don't know if we can not post them, or heavily redact them because there's a lot of identifying information, including addresses and HIX numbers and everything. So I'm not sure with the Attorney General if that's okay that I'd prefer not to post them. These are all, identifying, information on people going through health insurance, but Ms. Drews has them and will follow up with all of them. No.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we should hold off on posting anything that has personal information that should be kept confidential.
Thank you, Mr. Belcourt.
Thank you.
Any other person there that decided that they want public comment? I'll take it here one more time in Carson City. Okay, we'll close this agenda item and move on to the approval of the minutes for April 30th and May 8th. Are there any additions, corrections, or edits to the April 30th minutes? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
Marie Kerr, so move.
This is Dr. Ford. I second.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, looking at May 8th, board minutes, are there any additions, edits, or changes to those minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
Marie Kerr, so move.
And is there a second?
This is Dr. Ford. I second.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ford. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion passes, and I think I see Dr. Jameson joining the meeting. Mr. Fisher, will you note for the record that she's joined? Please.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I don't know if it's possible. There was one person who came in late who did want to do public comment. I don't know if it's appropriate to reopen or have them ask them to wait till the end of the meeting, but I wanted to let you know someone did come in, a member of the public.
Is that person going to be here through the entire meeting?
I don't think they were planning on it.
All right, unless I have objection from any of the board members, I'll reopen public comment for that person to come forward.
Thank you. They are walking to the desk as we speak.
Thank you. Ms. Atkins, will you make sure I'm sorry, I just want to make sure you get the microphone close enough to you, and then also, if you'll identify yourself for the record, please.
My name is Fanshawn Blackshire. I applied for Nevada Health Link back in January the 9th, 2014, and as of this day, I still do not have any health insurance. I was submitted for a heart attack at St. Rose back on May the 17th. I stayed there 3 days. My hospital is over $20,000. Again, I was readmitted for the heart attack back on May the 26th at Valley Hospital. My hospital bill there is $61,599. And correspondence between Shelley Rogers, my insurance broker, and Nevada Health Link, and myself. Till this day, I still don't have it. Now, I paid $130 insurance back for the insurance on March the 14th, and they notified Ms. Rogers that I needed $1.17. I sent a money order to them. They posted that. I sent that back in May. They posted it back on May the 31st. They didn't post it to the records until May the 5th. Till this day, I still do not have any insurance coverage. So I'm at a loss. I don't know what else to do, but this is the situation I'm having. And I think it's very unacceptable to me. You know, I just don't know what to do. I have been in compliance with Nevada Health Link, but I have no correspondence or anything. All I have is a letter stating that I was accepted and I'm eligible for the coverage. That's all I have.
Can you, are you finished with your comment? Because I'm going to see if Mr. Roos, is there a chance that you could leave the table and maybe go get some information from her and see if we can assist her today, please? I appreciate your coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's go back to the regular agenda. I am going to switch some of the items here and move to item number 6, which is the briefing, discussion, and possible action regarding the executive director recruitment and interview process. We're very fortunate today to have Leanne Easton with us, and if you would come forward, please. Leanne is the director of HR for the state of Nevada, and she's going to help walk us through the new procedures for interviewing candidates in a public process. Last week, I reviewed all of the candidates. We had about 50 of them, and consulted with Leanne and a few other state employees that are familiar with the process. And we narrowed that down to 4 candidates. And rather than doing telephone interviews with those and bringing 3 to you, we decided that we would bring all 4 of those candidates to the board for the interview process. When we extended the invitation to all 4 of them, one of the candidates asked me if the salary was negotiable. They're familiar with the state legislative process, and when I told them it was set by the legislature, she said, you know what, I'm going to decline because it'd be a move to the state. The cost of living is higher here, and it would be a lower salary range for her. So we are now down to 3 candidates, which is what we intended to do in the beginning. I do have a question for you, and the board needs to approve this. The 3rd candidate is unable to travel on the day that we have selected for the interview process, but he is very willing to do a Skype interview if the board is willing to have that type of interview process. So that would be question number 1 for the board. I don't believe that we would be able to do that from the health insurance exchange offices. I don't think we have the capability of it. If you decide that a Skype interview for this one person is acceptable, and Ms. Easton will go through that procedure, if you do accept that type of interview process, we would have to try and see if we could go over to LCB at the Grant Sawyer building, if they're available. And Mr. Fisher was going to check with Mr. Wilden to see if maybe there's some possibility of doing it at one of the HHS offices. So we've got kind of a question mark on where we would be able to do it at this point in time. And I don't know, Commissioner Kipper, if you have that type of capability at your offices.
For the record, Scott Kipper, I don't believe we do. We have a webinar capacity, which is one way. We don't have, I believe, a two-way system that would facilitate that.
And I'll turn and ask Ms. Teske, do you know if you have that capability at your offices?
I would have to check on that because we have a number of different locations throughout. I assume we'd be looking for a place here in Carson City, but I can check with my folks on that.
Actually, we were going to do the interview process down in Clark County, either Henderson office, or if we had to move to the Las Vegas, someplace into Las Vegas for a building.
I think it's very unlikely that we have something in Las Vegas, but I can double check with my
Okay.
staff.
So depending on the outcome of that, and Skype would be something where we could visually see that candidate. If we can't do that, then it'd be backing up to just a plain telephone type interview process. So why don't I have Ms. Easton at least describe that process for us before the board decides on whether or not they want to have an interview in that method?
Sure.
So,
For the record, Leanne Easton. So the public interview process, we want to keep it very transparent. So we have developed a procedure that's been utilized for the last couple of years, and it's been very successful. The process basically is that the candidates would arrive, they would check in with a particular person, they would be escorted to what we call a candidate room. We want to make sure that we keep the candidates in a candidate room away from the boardroom, so they're not allowed to have electronics or anything that could give someone the perception that they could be getting questions or anything of that nature. If we did do a Skype interview, we would interview that candidate first, because that way all the questions are asked initially to that candidate. We would also have them sign an agreement that they would not be, they would cut off their terminate their session with the board, and that they would be available by phone throughout the whole process, that we can call them back if we need further questioning. But the process itself is, once the candidates get there, they check into the candidate room. We would just escort them back and forth to the boardroom. What you all should have in front of you is the documentation on how this process works. If you have any questions on it, I'd be happy to answer them. But basically, we would go through the interview process. The board has set questions that have already been developed that will be given. Each candidate will make sure that we ask the same questions to each candidate, so it's a fair and consistent process. Any follow-up questions that you may have can be asked, as long as it's something that the candidate touched upon or it's in the resume or their application. So that's basically the process in a nutshell. Then the board would, I have a couple different recommendations on this process. One, and what's worked in the past very well, is once a candidate is interviewed, then the board, the person's taken back to the candidate room. The board discusses, and it's all a public discussion, as you know, the pros and cons of that person. And then they bring the next candidate in. They interview that candidate, send that candidate back to the room, and then they discuss that candidate. Then they take a vote. And this seems to be the process that's worked the best, where they keep a running tally, basically, of who's in first place, who comes out the best. So the board would vote that, candidate A is definitely number one, ranked number one, versus candidate B. And then the next candidate would come in, and then the board would vote again. And then in most cases, we only have 2 to 3 in a public interview. So then the board can, if there's a tie or they just feel that they need to ask more questions, they can bring the candidates in individually again and answer, follow-up questions that they may have. So it's a pretty laid out process, very transparent though, and it's worked very well. We have not had any problems or complaints with it in the past.
And for those board members in Las Vegas, I had Ms. Cox scan it and email it to you. So you probably have a copy of that document on your emails, and it's called the Recommended Process for Public Interviews. Ms. Easton, there was, you and I talked a little bit earlier when we were talking about the Skype process, and we were talking about a process of monitoring that candidate, and maybe we could just talk a little bit about it so that the board has a degree of confidence that they're not listening into the other candidates as they're being interviewed.
Okay, certainly. If the board chooses, we can try to find a personnel office within the city that this candidate lives to see if they can monitor just like they would be in the candidate room. So they can monitor, they can make sure that they're not texting or getting questions or anything like that. They're not going to be, because they're going to be the first person interviewed, but that they're not getting someone feeding them information about, oh, the board liked what you said here, I think you're in first place, or, anything like that. We're trying to keep it very transparent. And the big concern here is that we keep it very consistent and fair to all the candidates. So that is an option, and I'd be happy to try to find someone in that location. It's out of state, but hopefully I could find someone maybe that could handle that process for us.
So let me open it up for discussion among board members to see if a Skype interview or if we have to revert to just a plain telephone interview is acceptable to the board members.
Marie Kerr, that Skype interview is fine. I conduct Skype meetings all the time. I'm sure we can find some place in Las Vegas. There's lots of meeting facilities where they can do Skype at a pretty reasonable price.
How about comments from board members in Las Vegas?
This is Dr. Ford. I think Skype is acceptable. Everyone's nodding. Certainly it would be better than a telephone interview.
Okay. I do think, I don't know if we need to have a motion on this or not, Mr. Belcourt. I mean, we had not decided I don't believe we had made a motion that it had to be a personal interview at the last meeting.
Well, at this point, you haven't, I think you could put together all the procedures you want for the meeting, and if you want to make a motion at that point, I don't think you need to at this point.
All right. Then listening to comments from the board members and ex officio members, do any of you have a objection to a Skype interview or telephone? And obviously the Skype interview is the preferred method.
This is Julia. I think that a Skype interview, those are becoming increasingly common, especially when dealing with out-of-state candidates. I would have no issues with that, and I think it is definitely preferable to a telephone interview. We can find the facility.
Scott Kipper, I would agree, in having participated in some Skype interviews in the past, I think it beats the heck out of a telephone interview. So I completely concur.
Okay, thank you. Well, listening to the comments, then we'll then contact that candidate and let them know that the Skype interview is going to be acceptable. So with that, then I will give you the names of the 3 candidates that we'll be interviewing. The first candidate is Bruce Gilbert. He resides in Texas. The second candidate is David Hawes. He is here in Carson City. And the third is James Huban from Las Vegas. And we expect to have those interviews right now, Wednesday the 18th at 1 o'clock. Location to be determined.
In Vegas. Right?
Yeah. But it will be in Las Vegas. Ms. Easton has offered to come to Las Vegas to help us with the candidate room, to make sure she's helping us develop some questions. Each of the candidates will be asked the same question. And I'm very comfortable with the procedure, and I'm very grateful that she's here to help us through what can be a difficult process. You're making it easy for us. Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, you just wanted clarification, Scott Kipper, for the record. Bruce Gilbert is an individual that does not reside in Nevada. There is a Bruce Gilbert that works very closely with the Division of Insurance, who's the executive director of the Nevada Insurance Guarantee Association. And whereas I think he'd be a terrific candidate, I am glad to hear that he is not the candidate. Bruce does a wonderful job, and I'm hopefully that this Bruce Gilbert would be just as good.
No, this Bruce Gilbert resides in Addison, Texas. So, all right. Any other further questions about the candidate and interview process? All right. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we look forward to your assistance next week. All right, if we go back to the regular, put the agenda back into the normal order, we'll move to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. For the record, Steve Fisher, Interim Director for the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange. First of all, I'll just kind of briefly walk through a federal regulation change. There's a CMS 9949F regulation change. It's the Exchange and Insurance Market Standards for 2015 and beyond. There's a lot of language here that I put into the report, but basically the impact to the exchange would be the fact that certified application counselors are basically required to recertify at least on an annual basis. And so staff is working on that process and we'll be working through that process and what that means and so on and so forth. We'll be working with the Division of Insurance. I know that currently there's a current certification process. I think it's every 3 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll come up with some sort of a I guess you could call it a minor certification process that maybe happens through the exchange, and then we'll continue with your 3-year process through the Division of Insurance. And so we'll be working on that. Are there any questions on that? Okay, moving on. Just want to go through, there's 3 projects that we're working on in parallel. We have the Xerox contract, the wind down or the closeout of that contract. We have the supported state-based marketplace project that we're working on. And then finally, the RFP project. The status of the Xerox project, Mr. Roos is managing that project. We're in the planning phase. We have working sessions going on with Xerox. We're working through that process as we speak. And she will be providing a status report at the next board meeting. And so that's all I have to say with regards to that particular project, unless there are any questions for me around the Xerox contract project. Next is the status of the supported state-based marketplace. Once again, we're in the planning phase, working with our federal partners, working with our stakeholders in the different departments around the state. Just planning, putting a project plan together, gathering as much information as we possibly can, and starting to develop those meetings and the communication and so on and so forth. So we're going to be moving very fast, very short time frame on this project. And Mr. Haycock is the project manager managing that project. And finally, the status of the RFP project. Once again, Mr. Roos is managing this project. It's in the planning phase. There is a discussion today on the agenda about the RFP process. So beyond that, she will be providing status reports on that, on the progress of that particular project at the next board meeting and then future board meetings as well. And then finally, there was in the Deloitte assessment that came out back in the April timeframe. It talked about adding some additional resources to the exchange. We have moved forward with adding 5 additional resources, contracting resources to the exchange, 1 project manager, 2 technical staffs, 2 technical resources, security experts, and also a business process analyst. And then as needed, as we move forward, as the need becomes necessary, we will add any additional resources that we feel are needed to make sure this project is successful, or these 3 projects, I should say, are successful. And then the last, I just want to point out a couple things on the board calendar. Obviously, today we're approving the fiscal and operational reports. For July, a review of the strategic plan and board bylaws. And then in the August timeframe, we're in the budget cycle. So we have budget coming up, so there will be an approval process that we'll need to go through in the August timeframe. So I just want to put those on your radar for future board meetings. Beyond that, that's all I had as far as my board report goes.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Fisher from any of the board members? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Discussion and possible action regarding the semi-annual NRS fiscal and operational report to the governor and the legislature.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Steve Fisher. This report is I'll call it kind of a living document in the sense that we took the document from, or the report from December, and we used that as a template. And so what we've done is we've gone through and made modifications to it, additions to it, so on and so forth. So for the most part, it's the same as December with exception of some additions to the report. So I thought if I could ask the board if it would make sense, rather than just read 21 pages of the report, if maybe I just highlight the sections maybe where changes occurred, or maybe that would be a better use of our time here, or maybe you have some other suggestions.
Highlighting would be lovely.
Okay, I'm just going to go page by page. So
Why don't we talk about the change that you and I talked about this morning? You know, what I asked Mr. Fisher to do, and it is a major change to it, and on page, when I print it out, it's page 17. I don't know how it comes out when you look at it on the electronic form, but it's really talking about the state's transition to the supported state-based marketplace and the reasoning behind it. And I thought that the subject matter was so important that it should be moved to the front part of the report rather than at the end of the report. And Steve agreed that he agreed with the logic that that's what people are interested in right now, why we made the change, and then go into the normal reporting that we normally do. So I think, as we've done in the past, as the board starts to make suggested changes, Steve and staff will do that and then bring it back to me for final review, and then I will sign it and we'll send it off to the governor and the legislature. So we were hoping that same process would be acceptable to board in this reporting period as well. So with that, that's the one major change that I discussed with him earlier today.
Yes, thank you. For the record, Steve Fisher, on page 4, under the section, the board, there were some modifications, or I should say some changes with regards to voting members. There have also been some changes to the ex officio. Ms. Teska has joined as an ex officio, so that was highlighted as a change. We've had 14 board meetings since the last report, so quite a few board meetings. Under staff, it talks about the employees here at the exchange that we have. I think there's 13 positions and 10 of them are filled, so there's 3 vacant positions. Under the advisory committee, there were some minor changes there. And I'm now moving to page 9 of 21. Under the consumer and stakeholder engagement and support, under that section, primarily on page 10, lots of modifications to that with regards to reports that have been given publicly and the number of attendees who have attended those public meetings and or public meetings. Under the Nevada HealthLink marketing and advertising and outreach report, a lot of changes there. On page 10, on page 11, the open enrollment marketing, advertising, and outreach, there were some updates to that as well. Going to page,
Madam Chair, or Steve, could highlights on what the changes were rather than just changes? I think it would help us because I'm not sure, if just a name was swapped out or something, but if there's some substance that you could maybe direct us to that's been changed that you would like to highlight, that would be really helpful.
Sure. Going back to the Nevada HealthLink marketing, advertising, and outreach, paragraphs 3 and 4. There's a statewide awareness survey is being conducted currently to effectively measure the awareness of the Nevada HealthLink among our target populations, for example. On page 11, under the open enrollment, marketing, advertising, and outreach activities, outreach specifically just talks about the different outreach processes that we went through and in the paid media advertising that took place. So those are the two sections that were updated on page 11, outreach and paid media advertising. Moving to page 12, the special enrollment marketing and advertising activities, paragraph 1 was majorly updated with regards to goals, the goal for the special enrollment, so it talks about the special enrollment period and the communication there. And then on page 13, minor modifications to, the public education ads, public relations, just very minor changes there. On page 15, it falls under the Navigator Enrollment Assisters and Certification Application Counselors section, but on page 15, it talks about the exchange is currently developing a new training platform. It's important to note that because of the change to the supported state-based marketplace. And so there will be a training platform that will be created and necessary for training purposes. So that's the primary, I think, point I wanted to make there. Moving to page 17, as Madam Chair mentioned previously, this entire section here, the exchange transition to the supported state-based marketplace, is all new or in addition to this particular report. And then beyond, I know there's a report today about funding and the budget and so on and so forth from a finance perspective. So there were some changes, updates obviously to the funding in this report, or the finance piece. And that wraps up the, I guess, major highlights of the changes to the report.
Do we have any questions from board members to Mr. Fisher on this operational and fiscal report? Hearing none. Then if you will go ahead then and make just rearrange the priority of how some of the subject matter is within it, I think we do have to have no, we do not have to have approval on this, do we, Dennis? It's not marked, has it?
No, it's not marked.
Okay.
It says just, yeah, it's not marked, so no action.
Okay. All right. So, and after that draft has been completed, we'll review it one more time and then sign it and send it off then.
Yes, Madam Chair, we'll make the modifications and changes and get it to you for review.
Okay, and that needs to be submitted no later than June 30th?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Great. All right, if there is no other discussion on that item, we will move to agenda item number 7, which is the discussion and possible action regarding enrollment statistics. And Ms. Eaton, are you? No. Okay. Ms. Rich.
For the record, Laura Rich, Quality Assurance Officer. So I'm here to provide the enrollment statistics for the open enrollment period and special enrollment period through June 7th, 2014. If you just turn to the first page, it's a summary of the enrollment statistics broken out into the open enrollment and special enrollment periods. I think the board was interested in seeing that breakout. We can see that, I'm just going to go to the paid plans. We have a total of 36,827 enrolled in QHP plans. and 30,595 enrollees in dental plans. I just want to emphasize that these are not final enrollment numbers that consumers have through the 15th to pay. So we will not have those final enrollment numbers through the special enrollment period until the next board meeting. Also, Xerox is still working through various caseload, various different situations with different consumers, situations that affect payments and things like that, that could affect final enrollment numbers as well.
May I just ask a quick question about that?
Sure.
Madam Chair, may I ask a quick question on that?
Certainly.
So on the 9,800 people in the special enrollment that paid, some of those, I'm assuming, signed up during open enrollment and just paid during the special enrollment period. So those numbers don't necessarily reflect the people that signed up during special enrollment, if that makes sense.
For the record, Laura Rich, you're correct. So the enrollments are based on when that person paid and when that person was actually enrolled into a QHP. So if that was completed during the special enrollment period, it was counted as an enrollment through the special enrollment period. I'm not going to go through the remainder of the report. Really, it's just a breakdown of these enrollment statistics. You've got the eligibility determinations, the confirmed plan selections, again, a breakdown of the enrollments month by month. The breakdown of enrollments by carrier, dental carrier, and QHP carrier. A lot of that hasn't changed. Most of these numbers remain the same. The average age of a QHP subscriber continues to be about 43 years old. We also have an FPL chart there on page 7 of 9 that includes a breakdown of the enrollments by FPL. We also have the race and ethnicity pie chart at the end. Also by metal tier as well, we can see that most consumers, 55% of them enrolled in a silver plan. And there's also a breakdown of the percent enrolled and how many of those are eligible for APTC. The last page covers cumulative call center statistics. So this just goes over the amount of calls that were received, average wait time, and abandonment rate and average call time. So you can see all that. So if you have any questions, that concludes my report.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Rich from board members? I had a question, Ms. Rich, if you go back just to, maybe it just didn't print out on something on the enrollment statistics, where you've got the barcodes, they're color coded. And just take you to page 4. I think it says, I think my page 4 is confirmed plan selections. And down at the bottom, you have 4 different color codes related to dates, but you have more color codes in the bar.
For the record, Laura Rich, it may have just been cut off. I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the color coding is by month. So you can see that it is, the bottom would be in the October statistics, November, December. So the last bar up on top would be the latest statistics.
So it's the growth based on a calendar then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Based on the calendar.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Ford. Quick question. So the people that enrolled on May 31st have until June 15th to pay. So we should get one more report regarding this special enrollment period. Is that correct?
For the record, Laura Rich, yes, that is correct. We will also have additional QLEs and things like that that will affect the enrollment statistics as well.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Rich. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 8, the discussion regarding the state's request for proposal process. Is that Ms. DeRoos or no?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Greg Smith. I'm the Administrator of the State Purchasing Division. With me is Deputy Administrator Kimberly Tarter, and also with us, who just stepped out of the room, our most senior Purchasing Officer, Colleen Janes.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and welcome.
It's my understanding that you'd like a little bit of information. What I had planned to do here today, to keep things as brief as possible but as informative as possible, give you a 30,000-foot view, if I can, of the state's RFP process. Also interject a few comments along the way of areas that I think are particularly critical to a successful project or can lead to a very unsuccessful project. At the end of it, we'll give you some recommendations that we have and certainly entertain any questions and drill down anywhere you'd like if that's acceptable. Okay. The state's purchasing process, much like any other public entity's purchasing process, the RFP process, is made up of several different components. And I'll talk about them in order, but I will also point out the criticality of each one. The first one, of course, is developing the scope of work. I cannot impress upon you the importance of having a well-defined scope of work for us to, if you will, plop into the RFP document. A little bit about what we do and what we don't do. Our office met yesterday with Shauna DeRoos and several of the subject matter experts that you have. I'm quite impressed with the folks and their mastery of the subject, what they want to do. We don't do any of that. We don't purport to take it over. We don't purport to tell you how to do it. We run the procurement process. We keep you legal, if you will. But my concern, again, in the scope of work, there's a saying in our office, go slow now to go fast later. And anybody who's ever seen any construction-related projects, the McDonald's in the center portion of town here was a dirt lot seemingly for a couple months. And then all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, it's like the whole damn building was built. And that's because of all the work that was going on the foundation, the electrical, the plumbing, and so on. I cannot, again, explain how critical that is to a successful RFP project. There's always such a hurry to get something in a document, get it on the street, meet those timelines. And what happens is then in the next portion of the RFP process, there's a question and answer period. Usually comes about 2 to 3 weeks after the RFP is, quote, on the street and available for all the vendors to look at. When you start getting 80, 90, 100 questions that come in, and my understanding is we had last one broke the record. That's generally, not always, but generally a very good indication that not a lot of work had been done up front, and we're trying to design things on the fly, if you will. We talked with Shauna about the proposed timelines that you folks had submitted, one with a BOE approval in the month of November, another one with a potential BOE approval in the month of December. The timeline basically allows for we need a finished scope of work somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 30 days from today. Wasn't that, I think it was in August 1st, was that correct, Shauna? I'm looking down at you.
The first option had a July 15th.
Had a July 15th, which is 30 days from today, sure. And then the second option was maybe in August 1st. I can tell you that looking around the table yesterday, the subject matter experts, at least the indication, the feeling I got, that's quite a stretch to be able to do, to be able to have such a thing developed and ready to go. If you don't have a well-defined scope of work, again, you're going to be answering questions. Every question that's answered becomes an amendment to the RFP, becomes actually a part of the RFP. The ultimate proposal becomes a part of the contract. So the question and answer period, again, becomes particularly critical. And Shauna had even the wisdom, and we've worked with Shauna before on many projects, to consider a potential of a second question and answer period. Perfectly well within the bounds, helps define things a little bit more. Then you allow the vendors, if you will, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 weeks total to have the consideration of the RFP so that they have an opportunity to develop a well thought out, comprehensive proposal. Oftentimes when you're under the gun and the timeline is tight, there's a real pressure to only give the vendors 2 or 3 weeks. You give them 2 or 3 weeks on a project of this magnitude, you're going to get crappy proposals. And then you're going to be disappointed. And then when we go to negotiate the contract, and this is the last stage of the RFP that I don't think that Shauna had the luxury of building in an appropriate amount of time to meet either your November or December Board of Examiners meeting. We only had allowed probably 2 to maybe 3 weeks from the time the evaluation committee makes the decision as to what vendor you're going to use to negotiate the contract, to get signatures on the contract, and have it submitted to the Board of Examiners for their process. I can tell you that Kimberly and I have worked together for, I guess, about 14 years now, and Colleen has been with us every one of those years, and we've probably done over 1,000 major RFPs here in the state. And I can tell you that on IT-related projects, it's always a party negotiating the contract. It's never done in a week. It's never done in 2 weeks. It's just not. And it's not just here. It's everywhere in the country. They're just very complicated. They're very complex. And so, again, to do an RFP under the timeline that you folks have been dealt, and as I understand it, you've got a hard, I'll call it a hard stop date of October 15th of 2015 is the next open enrollment period that's been mandated by the federal government, that whatever vendor you select, and that's why I understand we're looking at the November or December timeframe to have that vendor approved. We heard yesterday that a minimum, and these are my words, but that a minimum of 10 months is going to be needed by this vendor to successfully transfer the system. So that means if the Board of Examiners meets on the second Tuesday of December, you're looking to have that vendor start the very next day or maybe that afternoon in order to meet that deadline. That's the RFP process. I used this analogy yesterday. It didn't get oohs and ahs, but I'll do it again. We'll see if it works any better this time. To a certain extent, any public procurement process, RFP process, is a little bit like a pregnancy. It takes 9 months to produce a healthy, happy baby. It just does. You can't go into the doctor and say, you know, I'm a pretty important person. I run agencies down at the state. Can we do this in about 5 months? I need it. And I'm not saying the RFP needs to take 9 months. Forget about that part. But it is what it is. And those parts of the process are just critical to making this successful. I'd like to make a couple of recommendations. Kimberly's going to make one of the recommendations that I think you'll be actually happy to entertain, to mull over, and give us some direction. And remember, we're here to serve you. We'll do whatever you folks decide you would like to do. I'm very concerned that the timeline that you have been dealt, the cards you've been dealt, to use some Nevada vernacular, are not conducive to running the usual state procurement process. You're going to spend so much of the next 5 or 6 months just getting to a point where you can select a vendor to then work with, that it's going to be very challenging for that vendor to produce a successful project. There are a couple other alternatives that we'd like to suggest to you other than just utilizing the state's RFP process. There's one that's available to us in NAC 333-150. And in a nutshell, basically what it allows us to do, and some of these phrases are very important to what I'm about to say. Unforeseen circumstance. What I'm going to offer as a suggestion is an emergency authorization. Now, when we think of an emergency, and according in NRS and in NAC, we talk about acts of God, national defense, or other emergency, those types of things, and you think in terms of storms, tornadoes, floods, those kinds of things, or other unforeseeable circumstances. I would suggest to you, and we talked about this quite a bit at our office, the unforeseeable circumstance that we find ourselves in here is the fact that the last vendor didn't go well. You had to make the unfortunate decision to terminate. Certainly didn't plan on that a year ago, 10 months ago, whatever it was, but that's where we are now. You've got a hard stop of needing to have a vendor and a system in place and up and running and tested and ready to go by October 15th of next year. That's not a timeline that we have the luxury of considering moving, as I understand it. And so in order to work in those, quote, unforeseeable circumstances, there is an authorization to suspend the normal procurement process or the RFP process. We can work with Shauna. We've done it before. It's a waiver process. In this instance, we would just suggest drafting a memo for the executive director's signature where you and I are basically declaring an emergency of unforeseeable circumstances. And what this gets us the ability to do, in my opinion, is it allows you to begin working with a successful vendor probably in as little as a couple months. And you're spending more time working with the vendor that you're going to be working with as opposed to doing this process and just trying to put points down on a scorecard or do I like this and presentations. It gives you more time doing the work and less time trying to just decide who you're going to do the work with. That's one option that we see in addition to the RFP. The other one, and I'll let Kimberly describe it because it's kind of her brainchild, if you will, but again, I think it makes perfect sense here, is a joinder provision which would allow us to use another governmental entity's contract. And I'll allow Kimberly, if you don't mind, to explain that.
Good afternoon. For the record, Kimberly Tarter, Deputy Administrator. So the concept behind a joinder provision, we have under NRS 332.195 the ability to enter into a contract pursuant to another government entity's contract, whether that is a state entity or a local government. And the thought behind the process that I had was, as I understand it, the intent through the RFP was going to be to limit those who could propose to vendors that have demonstrated successful exchanges in other states. That being the case, it just seemed to make sense that absent going through the RFP process, you would have the ability to speak with experts in the field. Perhaps it would be to talk to the feds at the Federal Exchange to have them provide to you a list of states that have what they have determined to be a successful exchange, and to then reach out to those states to engage them and discuss what's working, what's not working, to perhaps even be able to have a site visit, to see it, to feel it, to test it, to drive it, and then from there to enter into conversations with their vendors and talk to them about what they felt went well in putting this exchange up, the opportunity to bring them into the state of Nevada, to have them come and see what your system is, what kind of technology, what platforms they're dealing with, so that they can then focus on putting together a response for the state of Nevada that is comprehensive and based on fact. It gives you the opportunity to know what the exchange is the other state has, what pieces you want to transfer over, if there are pieces that you don't want to include in the transfer, and then the vendor can see how that's going to interface with your technology. That was the concept behind it, because those are some of the steps going back to developing a comprehensive scope of work on a request for proposal that agencies typically engage in. And that's the piece that seems to be missing in the amount of time necessary to develop that comprehensive scope of work. So if we can start engaging other states, engaging the vendors, having those discussions, having our people be able to see, feel, and drive these other exchanges, it certainly provides us the due diligence. It is to an extent a selection process. You're contacting those states, you're making decisions, there's documentation taking place as to how you're arriving at which vendor solution would seem to be the most appropriate fit for the state of Nevada. The concept behind the joindering then is it's been called a transfer system. You are then looking at a system, and I'll use, for example, Connecticut. Say Connecticut is the system you determine is the most similar to the state of Nevada and our needs. In that case, you're transferring Connecticut's system. You're doing a scope of work with a vendor who's going to tell you how he's going to accomplish that transfer, that implementation, the testing, the acceptance, so that at the end of the day, the state of Nevada ends up with a system that is Nevada's. However, it is substantially similar to, in the example, Connecticut, from which it was transferred from. So the joinder is saying we're going to join on to Connecticut's contract. What needs to take place in something along this line, whether it is going through a waiver process, an emergency process, or a joinder process, is addressing proprietary information. So we have source code that needs to be addressed. In doing a joinder, or any time you're going to be using any one of the other states' systems in a transfer process, there's going to need to be an interlocal agreement that will have to be entered into. That way, there is the state that owns the system that's transferring it to the state of Nevada, a clear understanding that, yes, that code is public code, it was paid for with public money, and the state of Nevada has a right to use that code. There is also code within these systems that belongs to the contractor, and so we would then also, kind of two-step, and I'll try not to confuse it, be entering into an agreement with the contractor, which is where our scope of work comes into play, saying we're appending Connecticut's contract to the state of Nevada's contract. We're pointing to that as our starting point, and then we're having them develop a comprehensive scope, which we're also appending to that contract. So that allows us to address the code issues with the contractor and ensure that we, again, have the right to use the code that was a part of the system you're transferring from. Either of the processes that we've talked about, I think that contracting model is going to be consistent. It's a matter of the authorizing legislation that you would seek to point to and which one you feel would be most appropriate based on the information we're presenting to you.
Lastly, I would just say, and then we'll entertain any questions, both of the two options that we've given you in addition to the standard RFP process, I want to assure you are not some little known thing in a book we found somewhere, exclusion, that these are things we've done before, certainly in the waiver process, and I'll use the word not adaptive to competitive selection. That's mentioned in there several times. And the reason I believe this may meet the test for a procurement that is, quote, not adaptive to competitive selection, again, because of the unforeseen circumstances, the time element that we find ourselves having to have terminated the previous vendor, create a set of circumstances that are somewhat unique. And I believe the law contemplated that. One of the neat things in Nevada's procurement code in many different areas says you will do this, you will do this, you will do this, or as otherwise determined by the chief to be in the best interest of the state. And it gives us the ability to use our expertise, our knowledge, judge the situation, and make some determinations along that way. So I just wanted to assure you that both of these options we discussed with our Deputy Attorney General Jeff Menicucci. We did it as early as just a few hours ago to make sure that what we suggested to you is a viable option for your consideration, and he agrees that they both are. Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, did you want to add to the discussion at all? Okay. Let's open it up for questions, though.
Marie Kerr, does NRS 332.195 apply just to local government agencies, or is it to a statewide agency such as the Health Exchange? That would be my first question. I appreciate the creativity and and you're bringing solutions to us. That's fabulous. It's wonderful to hear somebody come forward and say, "Here's our solutions." That's so good.
Right. Thank you very much. For the record, Kimberly Tarter. Actually, 332.195 is found under the Local Government Purchasing Act. However, the way that statute is structured it actually does extend out to the state of Nevada as a whole. And we have used it for the state of Nevada in entering into joinder contracts with other states and with local governments.
Do we have any questions from Las Vegas?
Yes. Madam Chair, Lynn Atkins, and if you covered this, I apologize. So I too love the ideas. I think spending 6 months developing an RFP when that time could be used, actually talking with a vendor would be great if we can come up with that solution. Just a couple of questions. So I'm assuming, or I shouldn't say assume, I believe that there's 3, maybe 4 successful state-based exchange companies out there that I would assume would bid on the RFP process anyway. So if we wanted to use one of these 2 alternatives and we would reach out to those 4 different companies, what would the process then be about deciding which one to go with? Would it be similar to reviewing an RFP? Would it be public presentations? Who would decide? How would that process kind of work?
For the record, Kimberly Tarter. That process, and we're more than happy to assist with developing, but it really, I think, would be something you would want to reach out to the subject matter experts that you have brought to the table, because they were the ones that were going to be developing the RFP, and let them provide and share some of their experiences. It can take the place of a type of evaluation, so there is certainly the latitude to have those discussions, to have them present their proposals, but it gives you the time to let them come into the state, to see the system, to be well educated and informed so that when they do present something to you, it is going to be more comprehensive and in-depth, I think, than you would get going through the initial RFP process, and that what you will receive will let you move forward more expeditiously towards a contract and detailed negotiations. So that would be our thought, is engaging the subject matter experts, getting some input from them, using their expertise, and then, of course, we're certainly willing to help shape and mold that.
Sure, and just to reinforce, that's a great question. We didn't come, nor do we usually have preconceived ideas when we go into these areas of what the selection process will be, because they're all unique, they're all customizable. We would propose to work with your staff and the subject matter experts in deciding what is important to your project to be able to judge and review and grade, and do it on a compressed basis rather than trying to do a one-size-fits-all to the world through the open RFP process.
Madam Chair, just a quick statement on this. This is Shauna Drews for the record. In our discussions with CMS and CSIO, there will be certain requirements that they will require for us to go down either one of those alternative paths. One of the things that you have to go through with an evaluation committee is you do evaluate. So you still have to go through some sort of an evaluation process. What we call that in this circumstance is more of an alternatives analysis. And you look at, say, those 4 vendors, you look at what they can bring to the table, and you present that analysis back to the committee, back to the board, back to our federal partners with our reasoning of this is what works best for Nevada because of A, B, C, and D. And so we absolutely have to say, it's not because they all wore blue pants today, it's because this is the best for Nevada. And while
Mr. Roos, we're having a hard time hearing you. I think the mic's a little too far from you.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
Much
CMS
better.
is also telling us that in addition to the alternatives analysis, that while we can do whatever process works in Nevada under our state purchasing laws, that if they are informed and kept informed throughout that whole process, that they can waive some of those 30-day requirements of being, we wouldn't have to do the 30-day requirements of the RFP. That would save 30 days right there. And if they are involved in the process throughout, I think it would just go smoother and easier. And then they would all absolutely be on board for that alternatives analysis and whatever methodology that we present going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Roos. That was
Madam
helpful.
Chair, this is,
Yes.
for the record, Florence Jameson.
Yes.
I think most of us, especially after a further presentation today, understand the RFP process and how onerous it would be. However, when we were given the other two options, the alternative, the unforeseen circumstance, emergency situation, where could be provided and we could proceed, or the joinder provision, what I don't understand is actually amongst the two alternatives, how those two processes differ. If one of them is more steps, more complicated, more onerous, how we decide which of those two alternatives we would embark on, when we would decide on that.
Great question. Once again, Greg Smith for the record, Purchasing Administrator. I'll speak to the first one. I'll allow Kimberly to speak to the second one with the joinder. On the first one, with the waiver, and it talks about the contract not being, or the procurement process not being subject to the requirements of this chapter and NRS 333 for competitive selection. The waiver process basically gives you carte blanche to do what it is you folks, we feel, needs to be done in order to get a successful vendor in place to do a successful project. You could take that to the extreme and operate very independently of a lot of things, and I don't recommend that you do that. I think you're still going to need to have a mini selection process, a compressed, if you will, selection process working with the subject matter experts. The difference is both get you the same place faster than an RFP would, and I think in much better shape. The second one, though, and I'll let Kimberly go into detail, the joinder provision, really, if you're going to use another governmental entity's contract, and this was kind of the part of this discussion we had in depth today with the attorneys, it has to be substantially similar, is Kimberly's phrase. I think the attorney would like it even to be a little bit more than that. Exactly what they've done in Connecticut or Kentucky or somewhere else. And then you're recreating what they've done there here. And of course, you're going to Nevada-size it, I call it a little bit. You'll have some different deliverable dates, probably going to have a different cost, but it's exactly what you've done there, where the waiver provision, if we go there, I think gives you more freedom to customize what you may want to do than the joinder. Did I steal your thunder? Probably there isn't much.
No, actually, so with respect to the question, what's the difference in process between the waiver, the emergency memo, and a joinder? Really none. So the only difference is the degree of comfort with the authorizing legislation that you have to move forward and the circumstances surrounding it. So whether you decide to move forward under the emergency unforeseen circumstances and NAC 333.150, which is where that resides, or whether you decide that you would like to move forward under the joinder provision under NRS 332.195, that's really based on your degree of comfort with the circumstances and which one you feel would be the most appropriate vehicle to move forward with the process. The process itself from there is pretty much the same. You're going to be engaging the vendors, you're going to be engaging the states, working with your subject matter experts. You're going to have a methodology for evaluating the information that you receive so that you then have a documented process which is defensible and transparent as to how the board decided to move forward with whichever vendor is your pleasure. So, and as I mentioned, the contract vehicles also within those two are substantially similar. There will be an interlocal agreement with the state that clearly addresses some of the issues surrounding source code. And then there's a contract with the vendor, which is where your scope of work is developed and put into place. The only difference on the joinder would be there would be another state's contract you would reference. Again, joindering, the concept behind it would be that your end product would be substantially similar to the product that the state you joindered with started with. So that their exchange and the state of Nevada's exchange are substantially similar. That's really the driving force between a joinder. We're transferring this Connecticut or Kentucky exchange to the state of Nevada, whereas the genesis of the other process that Greg explained using the emergency/unforeseen circumstances, you don't have those restrictions. You can start with whichever state's exchange, and what it looks like once it's implemented is not relative. And I'm open for more questions.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Lynn Atkins.
Yes.
Do we need to decide today which of these routes we want to go, or kind of, I guess, what is it that we need to decide today? I think, first of all, I'm not even sure. I know there's Deloitte, and I know I think it's Accenture. I can't remember the third possible vendor, and I don't know if the best way is to have staff reach out to these vendors and see if any of them are interested in partnering with Nevada, and then trying to figure out which of these routes to take, or if we need to decide first which route to take and then reach out to vendors, or if we shouldn't take either of these routes and go the RFP process. So I'm not sure kind of what we need to decide and how we need to decide this.
Ms. Atkins, we don't have an action item on this. This was really more an informational item. Although, having listened to Mr. Smith and Ms. Tarter on this, and knowing that they don't think the RFP process is conducive for us, I think the first step would be to apply for the waiver. That gives us the latitude to then develop who we want to talk to and how quickly we want to do it. But that's what I've gained from the conversation today. But I don't think that there's anything that we can do other than take this under advisement at this point in time. But we could direct staff to bring something, direct staff to bring it back to us for the July meeting, because we don't want to lose time on this.
Madam Chair, for the record, the interpretation that staff and the subject matter experts took of the motion by the board, while the term RFP, go do an RFP and find a new vendor, was used, we took that in a very broad term, a very broad meaning that we needed to go do a solicitation or a procurement of some sort. Now, you could also say, nope, the motion said RFP, request for proposal, and that is the manner and the road that we have to go down. If the board, after listening to Greg, decides, the RFP itself, that very specific type of solicitation may not be the best thing. Unfortunately, we might want to add something. I know you're doing a board meeting next week. We may need to add the change to that as an agenda item, because I do not have the opportunity to wait until the regularly scheduled July board meeting for the board to make that decision to change the mind, because we're running out of time if we have to go down that path. If we take the interpretation that the board, when in saying do an RFP, go find a new vendor, was more of the broad sense of go find a new vendor, do the solicitation or the procurement that you needed to do. And I think that we have an opportunity here, like Lynn was just saying, to go talk to the vendors. I would also point out that it's not just the big name vendors, it's not just the Accentures or the Deloittes. Our federal partners have pointed out to us that because we already have an eligibility engine in place, and as Ms. Tarter was talking about bringing a vendor here to look at what we already have here, we already have an eligibility engine, and we're not really looking to replace that. So there are vendors out there that were subcontractors maybe to a prime in another state, and they only provided that portal. And so I think that there are even unknown vendors out there to us, because all we need is that part. We are not looking to replace the eligibility engine. I can't even imagine trying to take that on right now as well. So I do think that there's a lot of people out there that we can talk to. We can talk to them about, can you work with our eligibility engine or can't you? And allowing the staff to go down the road with the interpretation of procurement allows the staff the flexibility to go talk with them over the next couple of weeks. And if you feel that the RFP, again, that term was very restrictive, I would respectfully ask that that be added to next week's agenda to broaden that sense so that it is more of a procurement. Thank you.
I've asked Mr. Belcourt to kind of help us on this because I really don't want to lose time either.
Under the future agenda items, action item in this agenda, you could certainly request that staff bring a decision item for the next agenda to go the waiver route or go to the joinder route. So that would be something that you could just direct them to agendize and including develop a proposal if you want to do that. And so we could direct staff to do that under that agenda item.
I guess I had a question a little bit more off of future agenda, but is it inappropriate for for the board to discuss right now, was the RFP a broad sense or very specific? Can we talk about that so staff can get going on?
I think you can.
Okay, then let's do that. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Fisher.
For the record, Steve Fisher, once again, thank you very much for bringing these ideas to the board today. I was aware of the waiver process, but not on a major project like this, so thank you. I appreciate that. Question number one kind of revolves around competition, the competitive nature of the RFP process. And with these two processes here, I'm just trying to think, does that remove some of that competitive nature? And I'm kind of more specifically thinking about, kind of pricing and the competitive nature and making sure you get a really good price for the product, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of one of my questions.
If I could, the first question, I think the honest answer to that is yes, it does somewhat remove that. I don't think that looking at this as we have over the last week or so, God, I hate to say it, but we're not in a strong position anyway. No matter whether you do the negotiation route or you do the RFP route type of a deal, in a perfect world, I would absolutely be recommending the RFP process where we had plenty of time here, those things. I think this is the next best thing, and again, a legally authorized, but I think the answer to your question is yes, it does reduce that somewhat.
And then my second question is, and I'm just trying to understand the process. The reason I like the RFP process is because you've already developed the process,
sure,
right? It's a process that we follow. And by going with one of these two options, it sounds like the exchange would have to develop some sort of process, right, to somewhat follow. Or has that road already been paved before and we can maybe utilize some of the templates that somebody else has kind of used before?
Oh, if I may, for the record, Greg Smith responding, a couple of things that I was thinking of. Yes, we have ideas, suggestions, experience from other ones that we have done to suggest. I want to assure you, this isn't a situation where we're just going to say, hey, Shauna, here's the potato back in your lap. We want to be a part of this. We want to help. We want to make this work for you folks. And so we'll use whatever experience, expertise we have. I would also suggest, too, and back to Lynn's question of what needs to be decided here along with the attorney, I can assure you that at least from our standpoint, certain things have to be done no matter what you folks decide. The scope of work being developed, some of these things that we're looking into, that's going to go on this week, next week. We're going to continue to do that. I think the question that you're being asked now was the word RFP used in, yes, let's pursue a procurement. And a lot of people generically use the word RFP. Or, yes, we want you to do an RFP. But if that decision can't come today, if that's next week, if it's next month, certain things, the development of a lot of this stuff is going on right now, no matter what you decide. It's going to be the same no matter what you do. So I want to assure you that the work is already started. It's not, well, we've got to wait till next week before we can start. We've started.
No, I was asked the question also on how you keep that competitive pricing tightened up. And Mr. Fisher and Mr. Roos, maybe you can add to it, but I understood when we were back at CMS several weeks ago that they were monitoring that compared to what other systems cost in other states.
Yes.
And if they could see that that price was being bumped up because of the time restriction, they were not very happy about it.
If I may, Madam Chairwoman, maybe this helps address it. One of the questions, I think it's question 6 or 7 on the form that we've developed, reads something like this: absent the competitive selection process, what assurances does the state have that the price that we're paying is a reasonable price, is competitive or whatnot? And you're exactly right. A lot of the background or the legwork involved in answering that question involves in analyzing what cost they charge the other state. In many cases, those were done as a result of a competitive procurement. And we can point to the last 2 or 3 projects they've done, we've either gotten that price or a better price. So there are assurances that are built into the process, absent the competitive selection, to ensure the state got a good price.
Thank
This
you.
is
You
Dr.
answered my
Ford.
question.
Yes, Dr. Ford?
So my concern at the last board meeting when we chose to go with a federally facilitated state-based exchange was I needed compelling reason to leave that federally facilitated state-based exchange. And I am very concerned that Nevadans and the community at large who's going to have to shift, including Medicaid, to the federal system will have to then shift to a new system that has not been properly vetted. So my question is, why must we rush the process? My question is, why can't we say not calendar year 2015, but calendar year 2016? It will give us a year of using the federally facilitated state-based exchange to have experience. Those products will have another year of experience, and we may decide that the federal system is working. And certainly we can have an RFP process that's appropriate and not rushed. So I'm not sure what the rush is, because we all agreed that we needed compelling reasons to leave the federal system in the first place. So that's my question, why the rush?
Madam Chair, if I may, I think that the one good answer, the only good answer that I really have for you is that, as you know, we just recently asked for our 6th level 1 establishment grant. The funding that we get from the feds in order to create this process runs out. I have to ask, the exchange has to ask for the funding to pay this new vendor to create this new system no later than November 14th of this calendar year, of 2014. So we have to have a final number. We could ask for a preliminary number on the October 15th request date, but November 14th of 2014 is the last date that is currently published that we will be able to ask for federal funding to help us pay for any development going forward. So while we absolutely may love the federal system, if we don't go down this path now and we decide later to go down the path, we will have to pay for it ourselves.
And if I might do one other clarification for Dr. Ford, the 2015 enrollment year will be with the as a supported state-based marketplace using the federal platform. If we went with a RFP or forget what it's called,
Joinder?
The joinder or waiver, that would be anticipating that being used in the 2016 enrollment year.
Yes, I understand that, but my question is, we don't have any experience with the federal system before we're choosing its replacement.
Right. Okay.
Madam Chair, Lynette, a couple of questions. I think I'm off on the timeline then. I thought that we would be, assuming we did the RFP process, that we would be before the Board of Examiners in this December. That's I heard this December, and that the new vendor would have 10 months to get up and running. But if it's not until the 2016 calendar year, wouldn't they have longer?
So you're right. The timeline gets a little hinky there. Again, Shauna Drews for the record. So we need to ask for the funding by November of this year. I would have that contract negotiated and it would be signed because you have about 3 weeks in advance to go to BOE, or we ask for a special BOE, however that works. Once we have that dollar amount, I can put it into the grant application. We go to the BOE. When we said 10 months, we're either saying, like I think Greg mentioned, they could start work that afternoon after the BOE, and October 15th of 2015 is when open enrollment starts for the 2016 plan year.
Shauna, you need to get a little closer to the microphone.
Open enrollment versus plan year, which is calendar year. So the new system, the new vendor coming on, just like the feds have to be ready, we have to be ready and up going for November 15th of 2014 for the calendar year or plan year 2015. We have to be ready to go and we have to be fully tested by October of 2015 for the 2016 calendar plan year.
Thank you. Okay, so that's clear in my mind. And I, 2 overall comments. I agree with Dr. Ford. I think if there is a way to, I'm sure I will get laughed at. If there is a way to see if any of this federal funding could be pushed off another year, it makes no sense to be forced to potentially enter into a contract for a new vendor when we will just have a month or 2 of the federal exchange as a state supported exchange. And if that state supported exchange works great, it would seem from our discussions at our last board meeting that we would maybe not want to move from that state supported federal exchange. Number 1, it's cheaper. Number 2, if it's working smoothly, and I use smoothly loosely, but if it's working smoothly, it wouldn't make any sense. And I think I just can't envision a circumstance where December of this year, we would be voting to change vendors. So that just makes no sense to me. I agree and had not kind of pieced that timeline together. I think we've had so many big issues, so I would have to agree with that. My second comment, I guess, because we were discussing whether the RFP process meant something broader than the RFP process. I appreciate concern about time here, but I don't think there was anything other than a traditional RFP process that the board was considering at the last board meeting, which is why we liked the idea of having time to think about this and not wanting to be rushed. So I personally do not think that we meant anything other than the traditional RFP process.
Marie Kerr, if I can jump into the debate a little bit here. Unlike a normal state RFP process for any other contract, we have a big entity that's overlooking us, I think, for our contracting. That's the federal government. CSIO and CMS needs to approve. So the guidelines and the cost, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And so in terms of competitive pricing, I don't think the federal government's going to be willing to spend money on rates that are beyond what they consider to be competitive. So I think that, in terms of that process, that may alleviate the concern somewhat. In terms of, do we see vendors that are going to be able to perform? I think the proof's in the pudding, right? If they're performing well in other states, they should be able to perform well in this state. If they haven't performed well in other states, I'd be worried that they wouldn't be able to perform well in this state. And so that gives you some degree of some degree of assurance that this process works. Do I think that we should give ourselves every option? And I think that was our discussion at the last meeting, is the reason that we're going through this process is to give ourselves that option. If we don't, we lose the option, and that's my understanding. And why should we lose an option that we would otherwise have? So thank you.
No, and I'll give you my memory on it. I know the RFP seemed onerous at the time, but again, I agree with you, Ms. Kerr. We wanted every option available to the board. We also said that if we got through the RFP process and decided that, guess what we've got right now is working so well that we don't want to select a vendor, that we didn't have to. So the discussion really was around the fact that we wanted to go down that process, but that we didn't feel we were so committed that we had to select a vendor. So now whether or not the RFP process is strictly construed, or if these other options, now that we're knowledgeable of them, I don't think we discussed it because we didn't know it at the time. But I am very appreciative of this. I do think that if we need to have a clear motion for intent that we do have next Wednesday, we haven't posted that agenda yet, that we could have a discussion and determination at that point in time on whether or not we should stay strictly construed, or if we should have staff investigate all the options that might be available to us. But, and I would say that if we lose the funding option from the federal government, I think then the options all go away. So, are there any other comments the board members want to make on this discussion? Or
This is Dr. Ford. I have one more question of clarification for Shauna, who's sitting next to me.
Okay.
It was my understanding at our last meeting that there was already funding to go ahead with the RFP process itself. I guess I need a little bit more clarification. Do we still have the funding for the RFP process itself? And what you were saying just now is about the funding for the vendor, correct? It's two different piles of funding, correct?
For the record, Shauna DeRusse, I think what you're referring to is we talked about a $10 million, we talked about $10 million that we had that we could put towards the new effort. And while we did have that, it is currently obligated. We would have to unobligate it from its current source, and we are unable to do so at this particular time. And given the new efforts in the Xerox kind of wind down, there is no particular cost to go down the RFP path. So we can put an RFP out on the street, we can have the evaluation committee, we can go through the negotiations, and that doesn't cost us anything extra than our current salary and operating costs.
The funding you're referring to that has the deadline is actually to purchase the new vendor.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
And if we have not selected, this is Dr. Ford again, and if we have not selected a new vendor, then the funding would go away.
If we do not select a vendor and we do not include the cost for the effort for the development of the new system in the November 14th establishment grant application, then we would not be able to ask for additional funding with the current information we have. Now, the feds may always ask, or may always put out additional grant application dates. But however, with today's information, that is, I have until November 14th. We have.
This is Yvonne Lewis, and I just wanted to comment on our discussion to say that I think at the time we voted, we were certainly looking to have the most options that were available to us. In other words, we wanted to go with the federal system with the thought that we could change if that was not working, and we chose to do that. So I think we still want to go down that path. And hopefully we will look at all of the options that are available to us, the ones that we knew about and the ones that we didn't going forward, so that we can then still have the option of going with the federal system, and if that works, we'll stay there, and if it doesn't, we will go with whatever vendor we choose.
I would just want to point out one thing is that Open enrollment starts November 15th. And by the time that you know, you have the knowledge here in Nevada of whether or not being a supported state-based marketplace works for us, it would be too late. So while I absolutely appreciate the thought, the timing just really is bad.
Madam Chair, this is Lynn Atkins. when we're done with this discussion, I have a question about another RFP, so I just wanted to put that out there, that I have a question about a different RFP.
Mr. Fisher?
I just had a question. Shauna, you may or may not know the answer to that question, but let's make an assumption that we have a cost by the November 14th date, and we make the grant request, and that grant gets approved. Do you know how long we have to expend those grant dollars?
We have until December 31st of 2015 to expend those grant dollars, to obligate those grant dollars. And then at the end of the grant period, which is December 31st, you have 90 days to fully expend and close out that grant process. So you would have really to pay all final bills and close it out. You've got until March 31st of 2016.
Thank you, Shauna.
Madam Chair, and I guess that, Lynn Atkins, I guess that's my other question that I had asked that I think kind of got lost. Is there any way under these extraordinary circumstances and really trying to support Nevada, which it sounds like the CMS and SSHIX have really been doing, is there any possibility of a discussion? If we go down this process, we need a little more time. Can we have till December 31st, 2016 to obligate, or till June 1st, 2016 to obligate those funds? I mean, I think if we want every option, we should ask every question.
So we've absolutely asked the question. If you recall, a year and a half ago, we all thought that we had until December 31st of 2014 to spend our federal dollars. And so many of the states were having so many issues, and the DD&I and the development had to continue on, that they started saying, well, you can push your funding out a little bit. And now we know we voted and we're using federal dollars through the next open enrollment. So the feds did make that decision to help out the states. Now, I absolutely have asked the question, will there be any more funding opportunities past the November 15th guideline? At this point, there was a resounding no, but we were told no before. So again, with the information that we have today, I think that's what we need to base our decision on.
What was your other question about RFP?
Thank you. I noticed on the one of the reports, and I can't remember which report, that the marketing and advertising contract is ending in March of 2015. So I'm assuming that we need to start the RFP process for the next year or two. So could we get an update on that?
Can we do that under this agenda item?
We would have the opportunity to extend the current contract with KPS3 if the board desires that we switch vendors. Then absolutely as much time as or notice as you could give us so that we can start that effort. You've heard today that it is considerable. Would have the opportunity to extend the current contract.
I'll ask, but that matter be put on another board agenda.
We can put that. We can talk about that when we get to the additional agenda items. So
thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask. Do you need to go right now? Okay. I'm going to ask that for that June 18th meeting that we do just a approval process on whether or not the board wants staff to expand it beyond a strict RFP or to look at all the options. Okay, and at this time, we're going to have to take maybe about a 5-minute break. Ms. Kerr needs to leave the meeting, but she is going to reconnect with us on the phone line, and we need to have Ms. Cox help us do that. So if we could take maybe a 5-minute break. Mr. Smith and Ms. Tart, thank you so much. It really was very informative. I didn't know that we had those options available to us, so it was very helpful. Thank you.
Welcome to AT&T's teleconference service. To join the conference as the host, press star. Please enter your host password. There are 2 participants on the call, including you. You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press
All right, Marie.
star pound.
Marie, are you on the line?
I am on the line.
Okay. All right. If we can get the meeting started again, please. Excuse me. We're going to start the meeting.
We're ready.
All right, Lynn, you ready? All right. The next item on the agenda is discussion regarding the per member per month for calendar year 2015. And who is Miss Eaton?
Thank you, Carrie Eaton, for the record. The purpose of this report is to provide the board with an overview of the projected budget for the calendar year 2015 since the per member per month fees have been set. And on page 2 of this report, you'll see a table outlining an overview of this budget. The board did set the fee for the qualified health plans at $13 per member per month, and the fee for the standalone dental plans at 83 cents per member per month. So the exchange total revenue for calendar year 15 will be reliant on our average annual enrollment. And in this table, you'll see there's different enrollment numbers, figures to show what our revenue will be based on those enrollment figures. The budget expenditures were compiled by using calendar year 2014 expenses on a basis for future projections. All these projections do not include any grant funding, and they do not include any additional staffing. These projections may also change in the future due to closing the current fiscal year, budget building for next fiscal year, and identifying additional requirements to become a supported state-based marketplace that may increase our fixed costs. At the March 27th board meeting, the board did decide that the per member per month fee would include funding for marketing and advertising in the amount of $2 million for calendar year 2015, and would also include funding for the EEF program based on current funding levels. Excuse me. And so we have those recommendations at the bottom of this chart, so you can see our fixed expenditures are, then adding those variable expenditures. Staff will be utilizing a 60-day reserve. I know we've been talking about a 30-day reserve, but a 60-day reserve will account for the removal of the individual billing and the transition to the supported state-based marketplace. And the original 30-day reserve really wouldn't have provided enough financial flexibility to account for no longer having control over when funds are received. And additionally, we have gotten some information that all other state-based marketplaces that do have a reserve, most of them are 6 months. They do range from 3 months up to a year of reserve levels. And then at the very bottom of this chart, you'll see the last row shows the remaining funds at each enrollment benchmark. And based on the enrollment estimates and the board recommendations, for EEFs and marketing and advertising, these figures represent either a deficit or a surplus from what we'll have. And as you'll see, if we do reach that 100,000 enrollment figure, the surplus looks pretty good, but that would be kind of too big of a surplus. In that case, if the reserves are up that high, the board would, vote in 2016 and likely reduce the per member per month fee to offset that excess. And I'm available for any questions.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Eaton from board members? Thank you for your report then. Moving to agenda item number 10, the update on the individual billing transition to the exchange carriers by Xerox. And I think we have Mr. Fisher start us off, and we have Mr. Green coming up to the testimony table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Steve Fisher, the director. I just wanted to start this off by kind of going back to the decision that was made by the board to transition the billing process from Xerox to the carriers. And after that decision was made, there was another decision that all the carriers would have to come to a consensus, and all of the carriers would have to move off of the billing at the same time. As of today, I've been working with all of the carriers for the last couple of weeks, discussing this option and this process moving forward. And as of today, we do not have consensus from all of the carriers that they would be able to move off of this billing process in the time frame we need them to move off of the process. The reason I state the time frame is because once the decision was made to go with option 2B, with Xerox actually close out the system closing out, or I should say the last issuance of bills would be November for December, that really shortened that time frame with regards to being able to move that process from Xerox off to the carriers. So there are carriers who absolutely do not have the infrastructure, will not have the infrastructure in place to take over the transition of the billing process from Xerox. However, the reason I asked Xerox to come forward and discuss this particular option, there were 3 or 4 items or tasks that needed to be accomplished prior to the transition off of the billing to the carriers. And I wanted Xerox to talk about and give a status as to where they are with regards to those tasks. So that's why Mr. Green from Xerox is at the table. So Mr. Green.
Dan Green from Xerox for the record. There was a set of material that was provided. It was only about an hour, unfortunately, before this meeting started. So
It is posted, so if anyone's on their iPad or computer, if you go to the website, you can see it there.
Okay, so I'll refer to the individual slides, but I think some of the updates are more about numbers and timelines. So I'm actually going to skip to page 3 of the update. It's the first page with some roadmap bars in color. As Mr. Fisher noted, there were 3 specific lines of activity that for which the carriers were unanimous in early working sessions that needed to be addressed as dependencies, regardless of whether or not a transition of aggregate billing to the carriers was enacted. So regardless of whether and regardless of whenever a transition would occur, there were 3 items that the carriers and Xerox and the exchange all agreed needed to be dependencies for that move. So I'm going to provide a quick walkthrough and, of course, open to any drill-in questions from the board. Slide 3 or page 3, in the May 8th and then stepping back a little bit, I believe it was April 10th, if my memory serves in terms of board updates, provided a roadmap that was the proposed timeline at that point. So as of May 8th, there was a proposed timeline for the transition of aggregate billing that would have been concurrent to open enrollment. Lots of discussion in that May 8th, as Mr. Fisher noted. The first item, though, on that roadmap, and if you want to fast forward to the back of the presentation, there's a complete roadmap. What I've done here is just isolate the specific line items. So page 3, data reconciliation. What you'll see on here is in the May 8th update, this was essentially 1 bar. What we tried to do here in lead up to this particular discussion is provide a little more granularity to the reconciliation activities. up to and including some specific metrics of the number of consumer accounts that have been affected by one particular issue or another. The question I would have in terms of walking through each of these line items, I'm happy to go through each of these, but the timeline here is essentially taking one roadmap bar and exploding it into what is now 7 roadmap bars, if I count correctly. Should I walk through each of the roadmap bars, or let me sort of just touch on the individual highlights?
Well, I think you need to bring the board up to speed on everything on it.
Okay, so in the conversation, and I'll kind of go row by row, recognizing that some of these are a deep dive into some of the technical issues behind the system. I'll do my best to try and make them more consumer focused in my update. The very first line here you'll see is labeled Complete HIX Data Fix. There's a population that was identified as far back as January, where in essence the HIX portal, the system, in essence dropped or did not record the advanced premium tax credit that the consumer was eligible for. So for those particular cases, of which there are at the current count 1,969, of those 1,969, the data fix for that population means we have gone into that consumer's account and placed the appropriate APTC value in the appropriate database locations. So if that consumer now goes into the portal, they will appropriately see that APTC dollar value. Same thing if they get their monthly recurring invoice. For these consumers, however, prior to the conducting of this particular data fix, we have been applying what you would characterize as an accounting credit. So, and I'll explain that just in a bit of a second, but in essence, it's making the consumer's account whole for the missing APTC value. So this first bar here is completion of a data fix, so putting the right value in the right spot in the system. The next line here for some additional granularity is there was another population set that has been discussed in various places, which is the incorrect allocation of APTC in a certain subset of cases. There was another set of data fix activities, and there are 2,189 of those. Those are a separate subset of cases. That data fix is also complete. The third line here is that from the time in which we have started this analysis to now, there are an additional 335 cases that are currently in research. When I say currently in research, is not every one of those cases it will end up being a, quote, problem per se. However, there's an indication of a report either through the call center or through a direct interaction with the exchange or the consumer where we have logged that in our continuing research. So we anticipate completing that research and then any necessary data fix activities by the end of this month, and I'm now moving into milestones that are in the future. That fourth bar there, which you see is a longer bar, is, as I mentioned, for consumers, and let me kind of make it more practical. If I have Dan Green and I have been eligible for, let's say, $500 in APTC, if that value is missing, when I refer to a data fix, I refer specifically to putting $500 in the appropriate database locations. At the same time, we need to go back in time to make sure that consumers or Dan Green's account appropriately reflects $500 in APTC every month for which their policy was effective. The process that you see here on the fourth line is we are going case by case, transaction by transaction, month by month, to verify that the combination of the consumer payments and the APTC and the premiums are appropriate or reflected in the appropriate amounts, I guess is a better way of saying that. In this process, we're working with the individual carriers. We actually provide a database, if you will, for each consumer's account that would enable the carriers to make adjustments they need to make in their internal systems. We're about halfway through with that process. We started with what I characterize as the priority cases, meaning the ones where there's an indication that the prior values and what we found as current values are there's some variance. Not to say that the other 1,000 or so cases are not important. It's just to say that it's about a 45 to 60 minute task per consumer. So once the data fix is complete, We spend 45 to 60 minutes in terms of the actual analysis to make sure that we have the appropriate audit records, and then we go through the communication process with the carriers. I spent a little bit of time in detail on this one because this is a thick subject matter area, and it's frankly one of the key elements of the individual and family program part of the portal. It's also something that's material to, I don't know if we've had this discussion in this forum, but the IRS 1095 reporting. And so that's a set of activities where the APTC value needs to be reported to the IRS for subsequent reconciliation on tax returns. So it's a complicated process, and it's not easy to walk through in a forum like this, but I'm happy to take some questions either now or afterwards for some of the technical details. But what's shown here in these first 4 roadmap bars are when we anticipate each of the schedule activities to complete.
Mr. Crane, just a question. I'm looking at the legend, and I'm on your page 3. On the color bars down in the legend, you've got a diamond down on each of the colors, and then over second line, the very last one, there's a diamond bar saying it's a missed milestone. So you go up and look at the graph. Does that mean we've got missed milestones on every one of these, or is that?
No, so it
probably should have used a different symbol.
Yeah. The symbols there, I slip into my Project Management Institute icons a little too quickly. This key here applies to all of the pages that are in this presentation. So on this particular breakout, if you will, of the roadmap, there are not any missed milestones at this point.
Okay.
We'll see that there are milestones in some of the later updates that are, quote, missed. So this key here, again, it's very PMI if the folks are familiar with that certification. But the full color diamonds there indicate that it's a milestone that was met if it was green or is upcoming, and the associated color of accountability for which organization.
Thank you.
Going on to the next group of activity, again, under this broad topic of reconciliation, you'll see 3 lines there. And the lines are associated with what we have called a membership reconciliation, which is similar to what we've done with our population for advanced premium tax credit, is we're going essentially member by member, making sure and validating that the data that is in HIX, the HIX portal, is consistent with the data that we've transmitted and has been stored by the carriers. What you'll see here is this is the first line that has a yellow bar. That yellow bar is indication that as of this point, it's behind schedule. However, what you'll see is you don't see a missed milestone, and you see a milestone that's out to the right. That's basically my confidence that we will make up that time. But this particular activity is there are a combination of data sources that we want to make sure are completely in sync before we engage with the carriers. We want to make sure that we're not having one data value, another data value, and then comparing with the carriers. So those 2 lines of activity there are about making sure that the data we present is as clean as can be. The last bar there is for carrier by carrier, member by member reconciliation processes. Now, that's not literally sitting down with a spreadsheet member by member. We're building essentially a validation tool to make sure that we can compare data sets. But this particular activity here is carrying us out, and frankly, it's an ongoing activity until the end of the project. But this particular bar here talks about engagement with each of the carriers for each of the members that are either enrolled or in a pending status or potentially delinquent and terminated through each carrier, utilizing that tool and making sure that the data that we carry in the HIX portal is consistent. Now, having said a lot there, I'll pause again.
I'm just going to make a statement question, I guess. So this reconciliation is not anticipated to be completely finished until October?
For that particular component, and yes, you could back up and say, quote, reconciliation, or what I've called on project capital R reconciliation. Yes, that's what the timeline would show. However, the reconciliation, what I've been calling the little r's on project, it's a cyclical activity and it's a wave. So for individual consumers where we're able to reconcile that data, what doesn't get reflected in here is where we sit at a particular time for the number of cases that are, quote, fixed or reconciled. If you look at that 4th bar, there where we say 1,002 complete of the 1,969. For each of the updates to this board or on a more tactical basis to the exchange, we'll be able to say we are at X of Y in terms of consumers who have gone through the appropriate reconciliation process.
How many people do you have working on the reconciliation?
Well, it's a couple different slices. From the top level down, it's actually one of the areas that I'm responsible for tactically on the project. On the financial side of the house, we have, and I don't want to miscount, so I'll count lower. We have 6 folks from the financial operations team whose primary job it is to work through what's reflected here as the 1,969. That's the spreadsheet by spreadsheet view. There's an additional set of folks. It's as we call it, a tiger team on project, where there are 4 dedicated, in addition to the 7 technical folks, whose job it is only to support the financial operations team in conducting this analysis. On the other side of the house, and there's obviously crossover, there's a different tiger team that is focused on what I'm calling the membership reconciliation, or the 834. And there are 4 analysts that are essentially building the tool and conducting the analysis. And then there's an associated development tiger team, and I don't have the count, but I'll provide that count after, of the number of folks who are going through the tiger team to actually conduct the technical data fix or whatever the associated process is behind the scenes for the portal.
All right, let's move along.
Okay, the slide 4. The second major area of dependency was a catch-up on the delinquency notification process. So in particular, what we're referring to here is a delinquency and a potential termination for non-payment. There are a complicated set and a different set of grace periods depending upon the dynamics of a particular case. All we're saying here is that the notices that we mailed for this first batch, which actually reflects 4 different milestones, 6,147, we mailed those items, and we are on schedule in terms of the activity to make the final comparison. Actually, it's ongoing quite literally yesterday, today, and tomorrow, to look at the same consumers and verify where they stand with their account at this point. So the number of 6,147 represents the notices. It'll be a smaller number that represent any potential terminations. Slide 3 here is the third component, or the third dependency that was identified by the carriers, which is the completion of the EDI testing process for qualified life events. So what you'll see here is this is the first of the empty diamonds, if you will. In our prior update in the May 8th, and then prior to that, I believe it was the April 10th, this was reported with an anticipation of being complete essentially last Friday. What you'll see on the very last 2 pages, which is far more detail than would normally be discussed in a board meeting, is the status of each individual transaction for each individual carrier. When that rolls up, what you'll see is the new projected timeline carries us through the end of the month. So essentially from the point of the last update, we have lost essentially 2 weeks in that process. And that's why I put in the appendix some pretty significant detail to at least demonstrate where we sit with each carrier on each transaction type. What you see here too as well is a TBD bar, which is, as you know, in response to some of the feedback we've heard in this particular forum, is the addition, or at least the potential addition, for some activities in and around user acceptance test. Associated with any of the major release activities that we have going on. More work to be done with the exchange to determine the appropriate resource set, if any, to conduct that activity. So to sort of wrap it up, what I've done, and again in more detail than I think would be typical in a forum like this, on slide 6 is the roadmap that we've been marching to. What I tried to do for the whole page was take the update that occurred on May 8th and then superimpose today's milestones, as well as some content there about activities that are not moving forward. So as an example, the key on the first page that we talked about had a cross-out text. If you look at that middle bar in orange there was discussion back in the May 8th board meeting about division of insurance and exchange-related activities, of which Xerox played a significant role in carrier onboarding. given the move to the supported state-based exchange process, that's just not an activity that Xerox is supporting the state in. We're focused on plan year 2014 versus the onboarding for plan year 2015. So what you'll see at the bottom here was, again, this was to tie out to Mr. Fisher's comments here. There's some activities in this darker bar, if you will, at the bottom, where those were activities that were in flight as of the May 8th proposed timeline. And you see the yellow here primarily related to the intervening or intermeaning, I don't even know if that's a word, but the activities that occurred on the May 20th board update with regard to option 2B. So that's the update. And again, I know that that's, I don't anticipate for future interactions it'll be this granular, unless, of course, requested. But this is sort of a deeper dive into an area that's been a significant pain, frankly, for all of us in terms of the reconciliation, the EDI, and the delinquency catch-up.
Do board members have any questions for Mr. Green? Any further comments from you, Mr. Fisher?
Madam Chair, no. Thank you, Dan, for the update.
All right, let's move ahead to agenda item number 11, which is possible action regarding the consumer assistance requirements that are a result of the...
Could we interrupt for one moment? Ms. DeRoos just had a quick comment to make in the middle of those agenda items.
Okay.
For the record, Shauna Drews, the lady who came at the beginning of the public testimony.
We're having a hard time hearing. Can you get a little bit closer?
The applicant that came at the beginning of the board meeting for public testimony saying that she was having problems, I just wanted to let you know that we did connect her with a customer service rep, and they've got at least her identity straightened out in the system, and it appears that we will be able to finalize the fix for her tomorrow. It's not something that would be finalized today. We have to work with the carrier on it, but I did want to give it back because she could not wait until the end of the meeting, so she had to leave the meeting. So we will be in touch with her tomorrow. We are in touch with her carrier, and I believe we've got all the information we need now to get that situation straightened out. I just wanted to give you an update.
Thank you so much. All right, so this is the consumer assistance requirements that are a result of the transition to the supported state-based exchange. Is CJ?
Yes. For the
Mr.
record,
Bowden.
CJ Bowden. Thank you, Madam Chair. In order to save time and move the agenda further, I know that all the board members have had the ability to read through the report and see the information that was presented. It is staff's recommendation that the points on this report and this report be taken to the Consumer Advisory Committee so that the Consumer Advisory Committee may look forward and make recommendations on the report for each of the items and bring those back to the board for approval. I would be happy to take any questions regarding the report or the specific items in the report if individuals have those.
Ms. Atkins, I'm looking to you for any questions on it since you're chairing that subcommittee.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions, and I just wanted to say thank you to CJ for putting all of this together, and our committee is looking forward to working on all of these projects. And also, I just wanted to acknowledge the public comments that were made today and in previous board meetings about the consumer experience, about the website, about the call center, about difficulties that our committee is really going to take all of that to heart and listen and try and form solutions that can be used in next open enrollment. So I just wanted to say we're listening and we're gonna do our best. So, and thank you to CJ who's gonna guide us through that.
Thank you. I guess we don't need to take action on this item at all, even though it's noticed as a possible action, is it?
For the record, CJ Bowden, on this one, if the board would like to make a motion to move it to the Consumer Advisory Committee, the report to the Consumer Advisory Committee, that would be great.
Okay. Is there a motion to move it to the Consumer Advisory Committee?
This is Dr. Ford. I move that this report be sent to the Consumer Advisory Committee for input and recommendations back to the board.
This is Devon Lewis. I second the motion.
All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. The motion passes. Then we'll move on to possible reactivation of one or more of the other advisory committees.
So for the record, Damon Haycock, Project Manager for the Exchange. The purpose of this report, as Madam Chair mentioned, is to provide the Board with information and recommendation on the reactivation of Exchange advisory committees. A little background, NRS 695I.350 provides the Board the ability to appoint subcommittees and advisory committees composed of members of the Board and former members of the general public who have experience with their knowledge of matters relating to healthcare. So basically, you guys have already done this. You have created 5 advisory committees before this year and a 6th just recently. There is the Consumer Advisory Committee, the Finance and Sustainability Committee, Plan Certification and Management, the Reinsurance and Risk Adjustment, as well as the Small Business Health Options Program Exchange. So additionally, in May of this year, a 6th advisory committee was created, the Broker Navigator Advisory Committee, and they held their first meeting on May 1st. As we all know, on May 20th, the board approved the following to transition to the federal eligibility enrollment infrastructure to become basically a supported state-based marketplace, to develop a request for proposal or a procurement to solicit a transfer system, and then end the contractual relationship with the exchange's current web portal vendor. And why that's important is because any of those policies or procedures that are affected by either of those tracks may require the assistance and input of advisory committees to make recommendations to the board. So there are, and I'm going to go over each of the advisory committees briefly and talk a little bit about where they are at and then what they can do if they are to be reconvened and the benefits of those. So the Consumer Advisory Committee was already reconvened back on February 27th of this year in response to significant consumer issues, the web portal system, the call center, as Ms. Atkins had just said in the last agenda item. The roles and responsibilities of exchange enrollment facilitators after the open enrollment ended, as well as to continue funding the top 3 EEF entities were the latest actual recommendations to the board. Even though the exchange will be transitioning to the federal eligibility enrollment infrastructure next plan year, we will still be moving forward, or our forward-facing entity, to Nevada consumers. So Nevada will still need to navigate initially to the exchange's website to be pre-screened for various programs, Medicaid, CHIP, or subsidized qualified health plans. Therefore, this committee can be very critical in addressing the messaging and processes that enable Nevadans to seek and obtain health insurance appropriately, expeditiously, and completely. And so for this specific committee, staff recommends that they continue moving forward per their established schedule approved by the committee members. Finance and Sustainability, the last meeting that was held was back in July 10th, 2012, where the committee approved recommendations to the board on the final Finance and Sustainability Plan. That plan was revised, and the latest date of approval was December 24th, 2012. Since that date, some original assumptions have proven false, and the process to receive revenue and expend resources has changed. Therefore, the last approved Finance Sustainability Plan does require some significant revisions that can benefit greatly from reconvening this committee. Staff recommends that this committee be reconvened to provide input on a revised Finance and Sustainability Plan, as well as provide input to the 2016-2017 state biennial budget submission. As far as plan certification and management, that last meeting was held by the committee on May 15th of last year, where the committee approved recommendations to the board concerning the pediatric dental essential health benefit and how it would be provided on the exchange. Now that the exchange will be transitioning to the supported state-based model, there needs to be, all the policies need to be reviewed, and a deep understanding of what can and cannot occur with the federal system will need to be brought to this committee, and again further to the board. Additionally, for any major change that the Nevada Division of Insurance needs to request from the federal government needs to occur by December of this year for plan year 2016. And so if any changes are to be made, there needs to be sufficient time allotted for public hearings and discussion and coordination. Staff recommends that this committee be reconvened to review all plan certification and management policies, as well as to provide the board with recommendations for any changes needed based on the transition to become a supported state-based marketplace for plan year 2015. The Reinsurance and Risk Adjustment Committee, the last meeting I believe was held on February 14, 2013, where the board approved, on February 14th, 2013, the board approved this committee's recommendation to recommend to the Nevada Division of Insurance that Nevada defer the administration of the risk adjustment and reinsurance programs to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. At this time, these programs are still deferred to HHS. So staff recommends that this committee not be reconvened until a time comes when the Exchange Board and the Nevada Division of Insurance wish to take these programs back. The Small Business Health Options Program, the last meeting was held on August 2nd of 2012, where the committee approved recommendations to the board on the employer purchasing and employee choice models. In transitioning to the federal infrastructure for plan year 2015, the SHOP will also be coordinated utilizing that federal system. With only 8 employers and 43 total individuals enrolled in the SHOP today, this transition should be relatively smooth. All small business plans offered on the federal SHOP will still be certified by the Nevada Division of Insurance. So staff recommends that this committee not be reconvened unless additional information is obtained during the transition to the federal infrastructure that contradicts any of the previously approved recommendations made. The Broker Navigator Committee was a new committee, held its first meeting, like I mentioned earlier, on May 1st of this year. It is currently working through issues experienced by brokers and navigators dealing with current functionality of Nevada HealthLink. As the current vendor finishes out plan year 2014, this committee will be able to assist in closing out broker and navigator issues. Additionally, the committee will be able to review the federal eligibility and enrollment system training and assist the exchange in developing Nevada-specific reappointment processes for 2015 and beyond. That was hinted at by the latest federal rule that came out and was the final rule on how to certify navigators and other assisters on a yearly basis. So that committee can help to develop that process so that it doesn't contradict anything in state law. So for the recommendation for that committee, staff recommends this committee continue to meet monthly to address current web portal and call center issues, as well as plan for the transition to the federal infrastructure for plan year 2014. Finally, there's a proposed committee reconvening schedule, and we started to stagger some of the start dates or start months. As you'll see, a couple of them had already started, February of 2014 for the Consumer Advisory and May of 2014 for the Broker Navigator. But we are requesting that we bring back the Finance and Sustainability in August, which will tie very closely to the budget building and budget approval process, as well as the Plan Certification and Management next month in July, where we can definitely come forward as we explain the transfer to the supported state-based marketplace. What are those policies that need to be brought up, and what are the decisions that need to be made by the board? And with that, our final recommendation is that you direct staff regarding the committee recommendations above and the proposed schedule. With that, I will take any questions.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Haycock?
Madam Chair, no, for the record, Scott Kipper, no questions. It's simply that the division concurs with the recommendations. These are pretty well thought out, but I think a great deal of value was added to the process by these committees in the past, and the division certainly looks forward to participating fully in the reconvening or reactivation of these committees, because I think this is a very, very valuable process.
No, I would ask that maybe staff get out to the committees that you want to get activated, have them send out the names of the committee members, because I know on the committee that I chaired, there's going to be some rollout where either we're going to shrink the size of it or need to replace a few people on it. So we can do that. Do we have a motion from the board to adopt the recommendations of staff?
Lynn Atkins, so moved.
Is there a second?
Levon Lewis, second the motion.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And thank you very much, Mr. Haycock. Then we'll go into the monthly budget projections.
Thank you, Carrie Eaton, for the record. This is our monthly budget update, and I'll just highlight all the updated information. We have updated grant funding information. SSHIO has requested that the 6th Level 1 establishment grant application, which was submitted in May of this year, be pulled as a result of the board's decision to not proceed with the transfer system that was requested in that grant application. A supplemental application has been requested in the Level 2 grant in the amount of $11.6 million to fund the other items that were requested in addition to that transfer system in the 6th Level 1 establishment grant. And those items included funding for a project management office, a full-time deputy attorney general, marketing and outreach, and provide funding for enrollment assisters. Additionally, this includes healthcare reform eligibility engine project for CMS mandated system changes to verify lawful presence and security consulting services. Currently, there are work programs pending IFC approval that request an increase in the Level 2 Establishment Grant Revenue Authority, which is being held for state fiscal year 15, and increases GovCHA and transfer authority to the Attorney General expenditure categories. This pending work program has increased the budget of the exchange by $181,099. I felt that important to note if you're comparing this report to our report from last month, since the total budget increased by that amount. On a state fiscal year basis, the exchange has expended and projected approximately 67% of the available budget. There are still outstanding obligations that will be satisfied prior to closing out the state fiscal year at the end of August. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Eaton? All right, thank you very much for your report. Going on to next meeting dates and agendas. Right now, we've got July 18th set for the interview date at 1 o'clock, and we're scheduling that from
June
1 and
June 18th is the interview day.
Thank you. Trying to move ahead here on the month too quickly. So June 18th, which is next Wednesday, from 1 until 5 p.m. The meeting place has not been determined yet, so just watch your the agenda item to see where that's going to take place. I have put down for future agenda items. I think Ms. Atkins, you wanted to know about an update on the RFP for the marketing
Yes, I think
contract.
Yes, I'd like some sort of an action item on the marketing and advertising. I have no idea where this will land. I just know that the contract's ending, and I'd like to know what our options are to do an RFP, or if we would want to extend the contract, or what all this process is. So I'd like that as an action item, and if staff could give us our options and what that is. I also have one other question, and I don't know if it's actually an item for the next agenda. I know over the last couple of months, the co-op has testified about some of their difficulties in transitioning into billing because they didn't envision that, and I know they seem to have different issues than some of the larger carriers. So I just kind of say that because I don't want anything with them to get lost in this transition, and I don't know if we need to address any of those issues. I do remember reading an article a few months ago. They were the most successful co-op in the country, and I want to make sure that we don't kind of, do anything that will adversely affect them, and just make sure we can do what we can to continue their success along with the other carriers. So I don't know that I have an agenda item, but if somebody could figure out if there's something we need to address or do with the co-op, that would be lovely.
It might not hurt to get an update from the carriers specifically on some of their concerns in the transition, just so the boards, I'm sure staff hears little bits of it here and there all the time, but it'd be good for the board to know. Yes.
For the record, Damon Haycock, we will be providing next month at the next month standard board meeting an update to all 3 tracks, as Mr. Fisher mentioned. And one of those tracks is the transition to the state-based or supported state-based marketplace. Part of that report will include the carrier onboarding piece and where we're at in the transition of bringing them into this process, as well as all of the milestones and where they are in that successful transition. So I don't know if that will adhere to what you're attempting to accomplish, or would you rather have a special carrier report, something that we may be able to put together with the carriers and the Division of Insurance?
I don't know, what do the other board members want? I would like to know, get an update from the carrier's point of view on how well the reconciliation process is going. We've given Xerox an opportunity of bringing that to us, and I think, just to get a balance here, I'd like to hear how well it's going from the carrier's point of view. And then also for June 18th meeting, we're going to have an discussion and action item on whether or not the RFP is strictly construed, or if we can look at the suggestions that Mr. Smith made from the Division of Purchasing. Now, are there any other items that board members would like to bring forward for the July 12th meeting?
Madam Chair, just a question. The reconciliation process from the carriers, is that for next week, or is that for the July board meeting?
No, July.
Okay, thank you.
July. I really wanted to have the June 18th really strictly for the interview process, but I do think we need to get staff some direction on the RFP process. So, all right. If there's no other discussion on that agenda item 14, I will open up public comment before we adjourn. Is there anyone here in Carson City? No. How about in Henderson?
No public comment.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.